bit about how you can enhance your audio and what I'm doing in my podcast. So as you can see here on this particular podcast, this is the latest podcast, and I have so far 4 tracks. And one thing I hope you're doing is, of course, in your tracks is making sure you label each one of your tracks so you can designate what you're going to include on that track. Also, you can see for this particular track, this is all the voices. So that includes Dr. Shukla, myself, and Vince, who is trucker number 3. So that's going to be the subject for this podcast. We had the track, as you can see over here, processed, and we're using the multi-band compressor, the parametric equalizer, hard limiter, and denoise, which is the radio announcer voice selection tool. And obviously, as you go through here and you select different presets, you will see that different forms of compression and limiting effects will occur, and filtering effects. So radio announcer works great for this portion. You can see when I select on track 2, there's no compression, no EQ, but definitely for this news story clip, we needed to boost it and give it some presence. Increasing the volume itself just didn't do it very well, and the radio portion of it, the radio announcer voice did a good job. On that story.
The Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotic Agents with that agency make a huge bust near Ardmore.
You can see the levels were good in that particular area.
But it's 7 people in Ardmore, Oklahoma, just south of here.
You can see my levels are not living in the red, but just touching the red.
Just south of here of Oklahoma City, and here's more.
We don't want to live in the red, but you can hear a nice, clear, a very nice, clear, right, presence. So then what you want to do after you layered and labeled everything and you've compressed certain portions of it, you can see I build bridges all the way through this presentation or this podcast to help us move right along. I even use music clips that represent what we're going into. For example, if you look here, we go from this news story into Coolio because Dr. Shukla is going to talk about what they found in Coolio's autopsy report, and they found meth in Coolio's body.
Well, Coolio had one of the most popular songs in the 1990s. Dr. Rashi Shukla loved Gangster Paradise.
Yes.
And you have a little news that we...
So I use that to kind of transition. It's just an example of how you can transition and move into different areas. And then there's another bridge here that we use as we move into our beginning. As we get out of the Coolio story, we are now moving into our subject.
Using.
When someone is addicted, involved in the drug lifestyle, everything is focused on that lifestyle and the fun that goes along with it.
Dusty old farmer out working your field, hanging down over your...
With Dr. Shukla, we now talk about...
And then Dr. Shukla goes into talking about how he's a farmer. So I found a good old country song, and I will give credit to that song and that artist at the end of the podcast. And then you can see all throughout, I have another bridge here as we talk about him living on the edge. I use Aerosmith, Living on the Edge. And again, I drop in Vince.
Drugs like heroin and alcohol kill worse than amphetamine. But when one becomes addicted to methamphetamine, one's brain keeps focus on methamphetamine and what it takes to get it and do it.
So you can see at the beginning we established the music here underneath Dr. Shukla.
Was also about that, and I'm sure we can talk more about that as we get into his, patterns of dealing and using.
We're living on the
And then we move through, and then we get through that portion of it, and we move down. We got another bridge. And this is not really much as a bridge as it is just a way to identify what Dr. Shukla is talking about. She's talking about how amphetamines have been promoted in commercials as early as the 1930s, 1940s. And I play an old 1950s television commercial. Here again, we have Vince and a no, again, this particular one, we talk about hallucinating and meth monsters. So you can kind of get a little idea how I use this sound effect.
Older than maybe someone who hasn't.
And he talks about meth monsters. You remember that? Meth monsters, the mental aspect.
Yes.
And he said if he didn't realize he was high, he would actually think these meth monsters actually existed. Did
Yeah.
you get this?
And then so we just kind of keep that. I keep that under just a little bit. And as soon as she starts talking about meth monsters, I drop it. And then a little rap song here. I haven't decided what to do with it over here. I may not do anything, but you can see I'm planning to do something, right? You can see the audio drops, and I'm planning to drop another short quote from Vince, our actor voice. And this is a meth song.
After them, and that's kind of what he's talking about.
Look, I know they're out there listening when we speak. They've been hiding out there waiting on me to freak out for a week. I don't need to eat, don't need to sleep. I just.
And then we move down here, and we have another little music bridge. And this one, of course, is another song related to meth. And these are just artists I find on YouTube who are not well known. They're just you and me in our living room or bedroom who have really interesting meth songs. And little Calloway, I Want to Be Rich, is what I'm using here because we talk about him as a businessman and making money.
Self-esteem.
I want money, lots and lots of money. So don't be asking me why. I want to be rich. Oh, I want to be rich. Oh.
Taraji Shukla, let's go ahead and move into Vince as a businessman.
So that song relates to what we were doing in that, and then we move into another song.
Years of his involvement, when he
Excuse me.
finally, eventually
Actually, just another music bridge.
gets out of the lifestyle.
So just a nice little bridge, and then we wrap it all up here at the end, and did something a little bit different this time, and we crossfaded Dr. Shukla, who is starting to read from a phone call she received from Vince 4 months after her interview, and I thought it'd be great to kind of transition her reading it to our Vince voice actor reading and dropping a music bed under it because it's pretty, it's probably the most riveting part of this podcast.
Kill people necessarily, but they destroy lives.
Involvement with methamphetamines destroys your life. I started using when I was 18 years old and my life stopped. From that point on, I was no longer moving up or progressing in life. Now I'm 50 years old and off drugs, but I do not have the life skills
So we felt like I immediately, when she started reading this very long letter or phone call that she received, I thought we got to get a voice actor in here and that would help enhance this portion of the podcast, and then drop a music bed because this is a telling moment in this podcast, and the music really helps enhance it. And then, of course, that leads into the wrap and our conclusion here, and all the, of course, credits here at the end, where I give credit to some of the artists and the voice actor specifically. Want to give credit to our voice actor. So again, enhancing this track and enhancing each of these tracks and using the fade in and fade out and cross fades are all ways that you can really make all your transitions very smooth. You can see even in these areas where I had to make edits to clean them up, we have areas that allow us to smooth it out, if you will. I'm just going to kind of zoom in. And in some cases, you can't see it from when I zoom out, but if you zoom really tightly, what I've done in some cases is kind of given this little crossfade because there's either a breath, I remove the breath, but I also don't want to remove the continuity or the natural flow of conversation. So I'll edit out our breaths or our smacking, our lip smacking, or our tongue smacking. And then I try to crossfade these just enough so we have a nice smooth transition and keep that natural flow of conversation. And you can see in a lot of these areas, let's see what's going on here. We're zoomed in really tightly now.
Thing. He mowed the lawn for grandma, right? And mowed large patch.
And so it's just a matter of just trying to keep in that flow. Anyways, those are just some little techniques that we are using on this specific podcast. And you can see it's pretty, in this particular podcast, I try to provide a bridge or something. We do it really heavy in the first 3 minutes. There's a lot of activity you can see to keep people's attention, because that is the most important part, right? Once you can pull them into the first 3-4 minutes, you may be able to pull them all the way through. So we do a lot of post-production on the front end. Use a little eastbounding down on the front end, and then of course we drag them all the way through, and you can see I try to do it about every 5 to 6 minutes. I try to have some type of post-production bridge or something related to the discussion to keep the audience's attention. So you can see here we go from marker 6 to marker 11, marker 11 to 13, 13 to 16, 16 to 19 and a half, and so on, and just try to keep people's attention all the way through. And so this is kind of something I like to encourage you guys to do, is to try to keep the production elements flowing in your podcast, so we can keep, not we, but you can keep the attention of the audience. So you have to really have your producing hat on as you produce your podcast. And that's in pre-production, while you're in production, recording, and in post-production. Always think like an audio engineer. Always think like a producer.